My name is Anna James, and I lead thought leadership research at the Asana Work Innovation Lab. Our research over the past few years has been really focused on understanding what separates organizations that are scaling AI effectively from those who aren't. And we found that measurement plays a really big role in this. And today we're going to walk through a framework that we've developed to measure the ROI of AI. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Greg, who's going to walk us through how we've applied this in practice with a customer. But first, let me set the stage with what we're all experiencing. AI is everywhere. Our research shows that nearly 9 out of 10 workers are already using AI at work, and 7 out of 10 are using AI at least on a weekly basis. So your employees are already asking ChatGPT questions in between meetings, they're drafting their emails with Copilot, and they're doing deep research with Gemini. So this isn't some future state that we're planning for. The adoption has already happened, while the companies are still trying to figure out their AI strategies. And here's the challenge. Our research shows that nearly 3/4 of organizations are still stuck in what we call pilot purgatory. So you know the cycle. You're in a pilot, you start to see some promise, and then someone asks, well, what's the actual ROI? So then you run another pilot to prove that the first one worked. And you get stuck in this cycle, and it's exhausting, and it's keeping us from scaling the very technology that our employees are already embracing. So why are we all struggling with this? There are some real challenges, and one of them is that AI tools introduce consumption-based pricing, which means that the costs are much more unpredictable. So now you have this pricing model that is much harder to forecast. Then it's unclear what metrics you should be measuring. Should we be using existing metrics that we already measure, or do we need entirely new metrics for AI? And finally, we know that AI is saving people a lot of time, and people are putting this time back into other work that they otherwise would not have been able to do. So how do you measure the ROI on work that never would have happened if it weren't for the AI implementations? So these are real challenges that we hear from our customers, and we're going to work through some of this today. So that brings me to our 4-step framework to measure the ROI of your AI investments. So you're going to work through each of these steps, and keep in mind that this can apply to any of your AI investments, regardless of the vendor you're using. So let's start with step 1, which is going to be identify the pain. So here we're going to start with the pain, not with the technology. So you wouldn't go to the doctor and say, give me your best medicine. You would go to the doctor, describe your symptoms, and they would come up with a treatment plan to know where to start. So the same principle applies here. You want to start with a business pain rather than just slapping AI onto every single process. So how do we identify the pain? So there are 2 paths that consistently work well for this. The first is to pinpoint what costs you. That could be time, the processes that take forever, could be money, which is pretty self-explanatory, or momentum, which is really that hidden cost of projects that stall out, or great ideas that get stuck in committees, or the teams that just lose steam because everything takes so long. The second path is to pinpoint what's being done manually. So try to understand from your team what is their most manual process, and I promise they'll have an answer for you immediately. And ask yourself, can that be automated with AI? Is it a good candidate for automation? And what would that unlock? Would it unlock time or speed or maybe insights? So you really want to focus on your most painful processes first rather than trying to tackle everything at once. Step 2 is going to be measuring the baseline. So here we want to understand our baseline metrics. And this is going to look a little bit different depending on your team or your department. So let's look at a few examples. So let's say our marketing team's pain is that their campaign launches are moving painfully slow. It's safe to say that you want to be paying attention to your time to market. Or for the operations team, being frustrated that manual approvals keep delaying their projects. Then you really want to anchor on what that approval turnaround time is to be as your baseline metric to measure that. Or if your IT team is drowning in unresolved IT tickets, it's safe to say that average resolution time is already on someone's dashboard being tracked. So it's not, or teams often realize that they already have the metrics they need. So it's not about reinventing measurement, it's just understanding what your teams are already paying attention to. Once we have those baseline metrics, now it's time to go a step deeper and really map out each of the stages of a process to understand where your bottlenecks are. What are the best candidates to start automating? So let's look at this typical product launch example. From intake to planning to execution and reporting. So let's say gathering requirements is taking 3 weeks because your product teams are scattered and information sits in all these different places. That's your intake bottleneck. Or in planning, it takes another 6 days to finalize your brief because you're doing that competitive research manually. In execution, we have a big slowdown of 4 weeks to draft those launch assets. There, you're creating the designs, you're writing copy, and you have to get approvals on everything to move forward. And finally, for reporting, it just takes forever because you're trying to aggregate different data sources manually from 5 different tools. So by mapping out each of these stages and understanding how long each one takes, you can really identify where you want to start rather than trying to fix everything at once. So this is where it gets interesting. Now we can implement AI to adjust those specific pain points to get rid of some of those bottlenecks. So in intake, for example, we can implement AI to help us gather those requirements so we can prioritize and categorize those incoming requirements rather than having to do it all manually. Or for planning, we can run some of that competitive research automatically and streamline approvals so that we don't get stuck in that planning process. And then for drafting the launch assets, which was our biggest slowdown, here instead we can now create different versions early on, create different design variations to react to, so that everything just moves a little bit faster to streamline that asset creation. And then you implement AI-powered reporting, so that you're automatically aggregating the data from those different tools automatically without having to go to each one individually. So once we've implemented AI for these different steps, then we let the process run, usually for a few months, depending on what the process is. And that is when you can then compare this outcome to the baseline that you had previously set. So that brings us to step 3, which is going to be quantifying the traditional ROI metrics. And this is where we can compare our new reality to the baseline that we had previously set. So again, this is going to look a little bit different across different teams. So we can look at this through our 3 examples. So remember our marketing team where the campaign launches were just moving really slowly? So by implementing AI, they were able to get to market 2 weeks faster. So they're reducing their time to market by 2 weeks. To translate those time savings into the business value, if we assume that their pipe gen is roughly 500,000 per week, by getting to market 2 weeks faster, they're able to increase that pipeline potential by $1 million. Or for the operations team that was really frustrated by these manual approvals consistently delaying their projects. They were able to cut that approval turnaround time in half so that they're 5 days faster. So from business value perspective, if we're assuming that each of these projects have roughly a $200,000 revenue impact per day, those 5 days faster lead to that $1 million revenue impact per project. But what about the teams that aren't necessarily directly driving revenue impact or aren't customer facing? Here, our IT team was struggling with just too many unresolved IT tickets. So they were able to implement AI to bring down that average resolution time to increase their team's capacity. And that increase in team capacity ultimately leads to cost savings for the business. So even if you aren't directly impacting revenue, those cost savings are still going to have a real business impact. And that brings me to what our research has shown and what I consider to be one of the most important steps of this process, and that's going to be capturing the human impact. So While the traditional ROI metrics do really matter, if your employees aren't thriving with AI, then you're not going to be able to sustain those benefits in the long run. So, the key question that we need to be asking for all of these initiatives is AI actually improving how we work? Is it genuinely making the employee experience better for our employees? And our research has shown that organizations that are scaling AI effectively across the business are measuring a traditional ROI metrics, but they're also expanding to these human-centered ROI metrics. So let's get into those. So we identified these three key metrics that include the productivity improvements. So are your employees actually able to do more meaningful work faster? So not just more busy work thanks to AI, but the work that they were actually hired to do. And then employee satisfaction. Are they actually satisfied with the tools that have been provided? So is it making their work easier? And these two we can measure through employee surveys. So the Work Innovation Lab partnered with our AI Council and HR teams at Asana to add some of these questions to our annual employee survey to be able to really understand how these different AI solutions are impacting the employee experience. And then finally, we have the adoption rate. So this simply comes down to, are your employees actually using the AI tools provided or not? Because if they're adding friction or frustration, ultimately employees are not going to want to use them. And then again, your benefits that you're seeing from that more financial ROI are not going to carry through in the long run. So those are that is our 4-step framework, both from understanding what the business pain is to measuring the financial and human impact of our AI investments. And now I'm going to invite my colleague Greg to the stage, who's going to walk us through a customer example. Thank you.
Good afternoon, New York West. Thank you, Anna. Can you guys hear me okay? Good afternoon. My name is Greg Geekley, and I have the pleasure of leading Asana's business value consulting team. For those of you who haven't worked with myself or my team, we do, as our name implies, we consult with Asana's top customers to help quantify the ROI that Asana customers are seeing from an existing deployment or to align with them on potential future ROI for a new deployment. So we thought what better way to bring Anna's ROI framework to life than with a real life customer story. So the story that I have here for you today is from one of the leading cybersecurity companies out of Silicon Valley. They are a very large core Asana customer for quite a long period of time. But they turned to us as they were looking to deploy AI Studio for the first time to help assess what potential ROI they could expect to see if they deployed AI Studio. And funny enough, one of the first teams we landed on was their field marketing team. So basically, the team at this company that puts on their equivalent of WIS or Dreamforce. These Silicon Valley tech companies certainly love their events. But as any of my marketing colleagues here today can tell you, these events are a lot of work. So we spent some time with their marketing team to understand all of the things that they have to take care of for an event like WIS. And it starts from the intake, so getting all the ideas for sessions like this, for meetings, speakers, all of that kind of stuff that for the pre-planning, to logistics and venue booking, speakers, promotion, actual setup for the day of event, and then all of the sort of follow-up and reporting of the sales folks reaching out to the attendees to try to generate some business. So we looked at this process end to end for this organization, and just for the brevity of time for today, we're just going to take a look at the first one, intake, and walk you through Anna's framework of how we quantified value for this particular cybersecurity company. So first part of our framework, if you recall, is we identify the pain points. So intake, in the lead up to an event, within about 6 months of this Silicon Valley cybersecurity firm having an event, they get about 70 requests by intake per week of speakers, meetings, events. So a lot that this marketing team has to handle. And when we look at what this team was working on, it's not exactly this type of stuff that our talented colleagues would be jumping out of bed at 4 in the morning. These intake requests come in, and any sort of missing information from the people that's submitting the intake request, this field marketing team has to follow up individually to clarify or get additional information. I remember they were showing that even if the date, year format wasn't correct, that triggered a manual response that this field marketing team had to follow up on. So, in terms of identifying the pain point, this very talented team was spending a lot of manual time chasing missing info, inconsistent formatting, stalled requests, and leading to delayed follow ups. Now, remember, the second step in our process then is we want to capture the baseline metrics. And this is often one of the more challenging aspects of kind of building a business case or quantifying ROI. And for anybody that has worked with myself or my team, what we always tell our customers is we aim to be as conservative as possible. I always screw this up. We always want to under promise and over deliver, just so that we're kind of capturing the situation realistically. So in this case, we sat down with a handful of the folks in the field marketing team and asked them how long they were spending on this current intake process. And they told us when they had to go back and forth with the submitter, they were usually spending anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. So, in the spirit of being conservative, we said, okay, let's assume 30 minutes for some of these intake requests. Remember, they get about 70 of these a week. So, we were figuring conservatively, this team was losing about 35 hours per week just triaging these intake requests. Then we brought in our AI studio specialist experts, like my colleagues over there, leading that session. And then we did an end-to-end look at all of the touch points within the intake process. If I recall correctly, I think for this particular tech organization, they had 18 different steps that they were manually working as they were intaking ideas for their field marketing events. And what we found was that we could automate about 80% of those with AI Studio. And interestingly, Anna and her great colleagues on the Work Innovation Lab, they did a deep dive of our top 20 customers who have been on AI Studio the longest. And what they found was that there was about a 78% reduction in turnaround time once the customers had AI Studio deployed. So in this particular case, we thought we could hit about 80. So we were actually driving up pretty nicely with our AI Studio benchmark. Now we want to put some numbers and quantify what the potential benefit is here. So you remember from our last slide on the baseline metrics, we think it's about conservatively 30 minutes to triage a request for this cybersecurity company, costing about 35 hours per week. We think we could reduce that by about 80%. So we think we could get that down from 30 minutes to 6 minutes. You kind of calculate that up across the 70 requests per week. That bubbles up to about a little bit over 1,300 hours annually. And then we applied the $75 fully loaded hourly costs of their employees on the field marketing team. And this one simple workflow for the intake process for this field marketing team, we forecast that conservatively we should be able to save them 105,000 a year for AI Studio. So if you harken back to that first workflow slide that we looked at end to end for this field marketing team, this intake process is just one simple workflow and many, many workflows. So as you think about sort of stacking up this lightweight ROI model across a number of workflows, you can see how that 105,000 really multiplies into seven figures of saving as you look at this systemically across an organization. And then, of course, harkening back to Anna's last point about making sure that we have human-centric ROI. You already saw the productivity improvements. So again, $105,000 in productivity gains just from a relatively simple fix of back and forth for an intake of requests. And then also just focusing in on employee satisfaction and adoption rates. Are employees using the tools that we're putting in front of them? And is that driving satisfaction for them? Is it freeing them up to do more high value work that gets them jumping out of bed in the morning and happy to come to work? So again, now just circling back to the four prongs of our process. One, identify the pain. Really try to kind of identify that North Star metric of what we're trying to solve for, that we want to focus like a laser on for something like AI Studio. Two, measure the baseline. Again, we want to try to be as conservative as possible. And that's usually done by asking some of the folks that are in the nitty gritty, in the weeds of the day to day process to give us a sense of what the current pain looks like. Then we could quantify the traditional metrics. We could get at that productivity savings, in this case, the 105K that we think we could save from just one simple workflow. And then always keeping the human-centered impact very front of mind for our employees and for our teammates.